Happy Monday and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Red Sox podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. I am your host, NESN's Lauren Campbell. I will soon be joined by my co-host, Massachusetts Pirates team reporter Jake Iggy in just a few moments. We have a very special episode for you today. We were honored to be joined by the Athletics Red Sox reporter Jen McCaffrey. We talk a little about the lockout, a little about being women in sports, and everything in between. So let's get right to it.
You are Locked On Red Sox, your daily Boston Red Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are here with Red Sox beat writer for The Athletic, Jen McCaffrey. So how are we doing today, Jen?
Pretty good, guys. How about you?
We're doing
pretty good.
So especially with the offseason starting off with so much going on, with tons of different players getting signed off of the free agency market, and then out of nowhere, Lockout came into tact. How's your offseason been going so far?
It's been fine. Yeah, it's been I don't know, relatively quiet, but I think that's been pretty much everybody. Just trying to write, feature stories, projections, those kind of things. Honestly, the Red Sox haven't in previous years done too much early in the offseason anyway. So it's sort of been similar in one sense. Just I feel like most of their moves have come later in the offseason. So almost kind of used to it being slow right now. Yeah, I guess hopefully things will start to pick up soon, and that means that a lockout isn't or a delay to the season isn't going to happen. But I don't know. That's in the cards for the moment.
Fingers crossed it does not delay the start of spring training or the season. You mentioned that, this is a slower time in general, but do you find it harder to come up with storylines, or is this kind of a good time where you write more feature stories and can kind of tap into more creativity, kind of force to use your creativity with the lockout especially?
Yeah, kind of both. I feel like right now not being able to talk to anybody, 40-man wise through the team anyway is a little, or talk to, front office people about guys on the 40-man is a little difficult. So you kind of have to get creative in thinking about prospects or different aspects of the organization. So yeah, that's been maybe one area that's been more difficult, but a lot of the offseason in general is just sort of projecting where certain players fit future for, future positions, or just, what players they might target, what the roster might look like, who might get better or worse, those kind of prediction things. So, the season is always easier in general because you can just walk up to people and talk to them in a normal year. But yeah, it does give you a little more time to work on some longer term things, which is always a good thing too. So.
Yeah, I've been loving your stories throughout this offseason. You've made me get a lot of speculation in my mind of what potentially could happen after this eventual lockout does end. But before we talk about the meeting that happened today on Thursday between the MLB Players Association, and the MLB. I thought it was pretty cool. This afternoon, the Red Sox hired Katie Krall as their minor league coach, and they became the first organization with two women in their coaching staff. And I actually got that from you retweeting it. And I just want to ask you, as a woman in the sports industry, how cool do you think it is now that the Red Sox are the first organization, like I said, with two women in their coaching staff?
Yeah, it's really important. I think it's important for, just representation across the board. Bianca Smith was hired last year in a minor league coaching role and has, by all accounts, done a great job. And, I think Katie Krall, which I think Alex Spear from the Globe reported that, seems extremely qualified, just like any other man that might be applying for the position. So yeah, I think the representation is key. The more women, that are out there, obviously, what the Yankees did earlier this week too was, a necessary step towards, women being in every sort of role in the industry. So I think these are, hopefully someday they won't be as newsworthy because it'll become more mainstream and there'll be just as many women as hired as men. But right now it's newsworthy. And I think that I'm glad that it's getting the attention that it deserves.
Me too.
I was going to ask if you think that hopefully one day, if this will kind of become the norm, and as much as it should be celebrated, maybe one day, Katie Krall will be hired, a Katie Krall will be hired and be like, oh, good, like that's great. And it just becomes more normal than making history, which is still great. But you said representation is so important. And the more women that can be represented in the league, the better. And then the more that happens, the more normal this becomes.
Yeah, I hope so. I think across the board, women in any, form of the, women trying to rise through and kind of break glass ceilings in a lot of corporate, industries across the board, not even just sports, but just businesses in general. CEOs, you kind of look at, Fortune 500 companies and how many women are in charge. So I think it's going to be a slow process and probably particularly in sports, but I'm glad that we've seen as much progress as we have in the past, few years. So that's, bodes well for the future and just shows young girls that, there are people out there that look like them and they can be in these positions. And it's not, it's not something that should stop them because, it's only men that are getting these jobs. I think it's a really good step towards the future. And maybe someday down the road, it'll be a lot more even than it is now.
Yeah, I completely agree. It was pretty incredible to see, like what you said, the Yankees did earlier this week, and it's been pretty interesting seeing what the reactions have been. It was awesome to see, Jared Carrabis defend that hiring because we saw some people, and it's sort of say some unfortunate remarks towards it. And it just shows that there needs to be more respect for equality to happen. And I think women deserve way more respect in their roles within sports than they have right now. But touching on the Players Association and the MLB's meeting this afternoon, obviously it was announced that there was no deal. But what was your reaction to sort of the meeting that happened today? And when do you think the Players Association might counter?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just kind of a step in the process. This was never going to be figured out today by any means. They're way too far apart. I think it's just kind of like a scheduled meeting on the calendar, or, a dentist appointment, if you will, kind of get, check this off and move on to the next one. I don't think anybody was assuming that anything was going to necessarily substantially, come out of anything substantial is going to come out of today. So yeah, I would imagine within the next week or so, the PA will come back with, some proposals that, counter proposals to what the league put on the table. But a lot of this stuff ends up coming down to the last, few days. There's going to be a crunch towards the end. I feel like a lot of people, particularly people that are, following and reporting on the labor, negotiations very closely, have indicated that both sides really don't want to, and it makes sense that both sides don't really want to, miss too much time because obviously that means revenue out of both of their pockets, and especially coming off the 2020 season that was shortened. So you would think that when push comes to shove, something's got to break. But it's probably going to be a painful process down to kind of the final wire of, them figuring things out, hashing things out in those final few days before they really can't afford to miss any games. So I'm sure at this point, the start of spring training will be delayed. I think, though, I have to imagine, though, that they're both going to try to figure something out before delaying the regular season, just because it means, I think, too much to both sides. So what that means and who's going to end up, conceding some things on both sides, I guess we're going to find out. But yeah, I think today was just another, kind of step in the process and not necessarily a good or a bad thing.
Do you think because the sides are so far apart, but because there is that need to hopefully not lose a lot of games, do you think that causes a sense of urgency on either side, or do you think both sides will be kind of stubborn in what they both want?
I'm sure they'll be both stubborn. I feel like there's just the track record. Obviously, we saw what happened, in 2020 trying to get the season started, and that was just brutal. Watching that, as we all did from the sidelines, pretty much. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's probably there's just both sides have incentive to wanting to get it started. Fewer games means less money for the players, but also fewer games means fewer people in the stands for the owners. So and less overall money. So yeah, it's a tough one to try to figure out what the resolution's going to end up being. But yeah, I have to imagine that this is all ever, always been about money and losing, games at the start of the season leaves some money on the table. So I feel like that's going to be obviously the key point that they're looking at.
Hope you're enjoying our conversation with the Athletic's Jen McCaffrey. We'll get you right back to our conversation, part 2 of our conversation, right here on Locked On Red Sox in just a few moments. As always, thank you for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. But first, I do need to tell you about Built Bar. By now, you probably know me well enough to know how much I love Built Bar. And now that we are in the new year, that means you probably have some New Year's resolutions. And if yours is about getting fit, maybe eating a little bit healthier, make sure you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, honestly, maybe even better than a candy bar. Built Bar makes it easy to stick to your resolution because it tastes so good you'll actually want to eat it. It's unlike any other protein bar that may taste a little chalky, maybe a little waxy, a bit like cardboard. Built Bar does not taste like that. And because you want to eat healthy, it can get boring. And somebody who lives an active lifestyle, I totally understand that. By like week 3, you're probably thinking, this just isn't worth it. Where is the chocolate? The chocolate is right in Built Bar because they are covered in 100% real chocolate. Most of them contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. And here's an idea for the new year. Go to all your secret treat stashes at home, in the pantry. Maybe you're like me and have a little snack drawer in the office, in the car, wherever. Throw out all the sugary or calorie-filled treats and replace them with Built Bars. So then when you're craving a snack or a little treat, you can reach for something that's healthy and also taste incredible. And there's so many flavors to choose from. Coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, my personal favorite, cookies and cream. There's literally something for everyone. And we have an offer for you. Head on over to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off your order. That's LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com.
Makes sense. And the one thing that I keep on thinking about anytime the subject of when the lockout ends comes into my mind is how much leeway do you think that they're going to give teams to be able to sign all these free agents that are out on the market? Do you think that they'll probably give them like a week or so before they actually start spring training?
Yeah, I'm sure they'll have to have that figured out as well, of just getting these guys, initiated into new teams and new systems, and kind of even just, once things do get hashed out, there's gonna need to be, at least, even if it is a shortened spring training, you would think 3 weeks at a minimum, just to get guys ramped up and not hurt players. So that I'm sure will all be figured in, but also, and guys that are coming to new teams, meeting new guys, and kind of learning a new system and learning a new team in a shorter amount of time. So it's going to be interesting, and it's definitely going to affect probably the quality of play in the first few months, because guys aren't going to be as ready. And we saw in July of 2020 just sort of some of the effects of coming off of a weird spring that no one was able to do much. So I got to imagine it's going to be a little bit similar to that.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so hard for the players too. There's so much unknown, and as much as they can work out, they're not, I'm sure they're preparing still to go to Fort Myers or Arizona for February 14th, but there's still so much unknown in the future. And this lockout could end tomorrow. This lockout could end in May. I just, like, your best guess, like, when do you think it will end?
I mean, I think so. I'd say like March 1st. Let's just throw that out there. That gives them a couple of weeks to get going. That's probably far too optimistic, but gets them a couple weeks to get going, and the season starts on March 31st. So I mean, yeah, spring training typically would have started, a few weeks prior. So they're definitely missing some time and some time to ramp up. But it would still give the players, a little bit of a runway to get ready for the season. So I think that's probably a soft date that both sides have in mind of trying to get something done at the latest, before losing regular season games, March 1st. But hopefully it's before that.
So do we, and I bet you do too. So you can start actually reporting on storylines. But one of the biggest storylines, especially after the lockout ends, is how are the Red Sox going to be able to upgrade this bullpen? And we obviously saw Matt Barnes do very well, and which helped him get an All-Star appearance. But after the All-Star break, had a 6.48 ERA over 22 games, and it was reported that he will most likely be the setup man in 2022. And you brought up Ian Kennedy as a potential option in that closer role off of free agency for the Red Sox. But I was wondering who else you could potentially see the Red Sox go after.
Yeah, I don't think it's set in stone that Barnes won't be the closer. I think it seems like it makes more sense to kind of have him be in that setup role, just given, the fatigue that he dealt with last year and kind of just his overall mix in general. It feels like he's been better suited for a setup, kind of an eighth inning role. Or maybe even just a role where it's not one guy that gets the high leverage spots. Someone else kind of comes in and kind of tag teams with him on that. So I think, it's not necessarily, I don't want to write Barnes off right away. And, that's, Alex Cora hasn't said anything, and it's not, anything official, but on the same, on the other hand, they absolutely need more bullpen help, especially knowing that in considering that, Garrett Whitlock's probably going to be headed to the rotation. They've talked a lot about that and just wanting to stretch him out. You saw him pitch multiple innings multiple times last year. And there's just too much upside there to not at least give him a look in the rotation, considering he was a pitcher, a starting pitcher, before last year. So all that, there's guys out there on the free agent market that have closing experience. I think, we mentioned, Ian Kennedy, but they might even go after just some high leverage guys like, a Ryan Tepera or an Andrew Chafin, guys that, are solid relievers, maybe not have the traditional closing experience, but I don't think the Red Sox are looking for a traditional closer. If they continue with kind of the same approach that they had used with Whitlock last year, where it wasn't specifically just the ninth inning, it was kind of the heart of the order was coming up late in a game where they were up a run or tie game, then they would bring him in and kind of try to lock down, the game in that situation. So I think, if there's any number of guys out there, there might be a trade that they try to pull off. I'm sure they kind of have all their models set up for, what's kind of the best options for them. But I mean, there's those guys. Those guys kind of stand out just because of their numbers. But I feel like every offseason that Heimblum's been in charge, we've been surprised by something that he's done. So maybe they'll, pick someone up off the scrap heap that ends up, performing really well this year for them and takes over that role. So I think that'll definitely be a key priority, though, once the lockout is lifted.
You mentioned Garrett Whitlock and that he's likely going to at least get a crack at the rotation because that's his natural position, and he was stretched out a little bit in the 2021 season. For me, I have talked myself into him being the closer. Do you think the Red Sox would go that route if he maybe doesn't do so well in the rotation, or would that be too much like a mental, like kind of screwing with his mind there? Like, am I going to be a starter? Am I going to be in the bullpen? Like, do you see him like wherever he starts, whether it's the rotation or the bullpen, do you see the Red Sox just sticking with him in one specific role?
Yeah, I can't see them kind of jerking him back and forth because we've seen obviously that hasn't had the best results in past years. I don't think it's totally out of the question though that, we've been thinking that he's going to be headed towards, a rotation spot. But again, if they don't find someone that they like or, they don't end up signing a guy that they think can or trading for a guy they think can fill out the back end, maybe they Whitlock in that spot. It feels like there's just too much potential for him to not, take over, at least try to take over a rotation spot. But I also don't think they're gonna try to, move him into the rotation and then halfway through the year move him back into the bullpen. I feel like they would just stick with one plan, at least for this year. Unless something, goes completely haywire or he gets hurt or any number of things. So I think, yeah, I mean, it's one of those tricky situations where you want to see what a guy has, but you're not 100% sure how he's going to perform in that role. I mean, that could be anybody, obviously, but especially with a guy like him. So yeah, I don't think it's totally out of the question that he would not be in a bullpen role, but I think it's more likely that he's going to end up in the rotation, in the back end of the rotation.
Thank you for continuing to check in on our conversation with the Athletic's Jen McCaffrey. We do have one more segment to get to with her. Again, Jen McCaffrey is the Red Sox beat reporter for The Athletic. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. Before we head into our third and final segment, I need to tell you about BetOnline because BetOnline would like to wish you a happy new betting year as we continue to the march to the playoffs and beyond. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all of the best sports wagering action for 2022. And it's a new year, which means there is a new updated desktop and mobile website, so you can sign up today to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use promo code LOCKEDON to get started and receive that 50% bonus. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, UFC, right down to your favorite Vegas casino games, do not wait to take advantage for all the amazing offers available for 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and the easiest way to wager on all of your favorite sports. That's BetOnline, where the game starts.
That's interesting. Yeah, we don't want a whole opposite of Daniel Bard sort of situation, but one other position there's a glaring need, in my opinion, for the Red Sox is at second base. They have Christian Arroyo over there, who has had injury issues throughout his time with the Red Sox, and we could potentially see Kike Hernandez go from the outfield over to second base. But how do you see the Red Sox potentially approaching that position?
Yeah, that's another interesting one that they have some pieces that could fill in, and you're kind of wondering, are they going to try to go after another outfielder, and that would move Kike, into second base more full time if they want to use Jackie Bradley Jr. more in the outfield, or if Jackie's just going to be a defensive replacement and keep Kike in center. So I think has created a lot of options for himself in the past. The flexible roster options that he built the 2021 roster around. So I mean, I think it's intentional that he's trying to keep his options open. But you don't want to forget about Christian Arroyo, and while he hasn't played really a full season his entire career because of injury, you have to be mindful of that and probably want to get a second baseman that has a little more durability. I don't think you want to necessarily write Arroyo off either, just because he's been able to, when he has been on the field, he has been pretty productive for you. So maybe it's just he's had several strokes of bad luck and you want to give him a shot. But I think if that's the route you're going, you definitely need to sign another backup. I think like so many people have asked about Jose Iglesias. Where if he's going to be able to fit into the equation, and that's a possibility. I mean, I don't know if you want to read too much into 1 month of, or 6 weeks of a solid offensive performance, but he's a good defender as well. So there's options there. And yeah, I think it's very much going to depend on what they do with their outfield mix and how they want to kind of weave guys into different positions, if they want to have guys have more stability at roles and have guys that are not moving around as much as last year, or if that's kind of what they like about the team is that guys can play multiple positions and kind of go from there.
Do you think Jarren Duran sees any time at second base, or are the Red Sox going to be committed to keeping him in the outfield?
Yeah, that's something I've wondered about too. He obviously came up as a second baseman, and that's his natural spot. And the main reason they moved him to the outfield was because of his speed. And of course, then the pandemic happened, and I think he had done a little outfield work in 2018. 2019 wasn't in the outfield, and then kind of missed all of 2020. So he's had a kind of a tough stretch here, and I know people are already wanting to write him off. After 25 games in the majors that were unproductive. But yeah, I do wonder if they're thinking about maybe moving him back to a second base spot and giving that a look, just because there is the need, and they have the outfield sort of there's more options there than there are at second base. So that's I think it's definitely something they could consider, but it's also being, him being a 40-man guy and him being, in this being the lockout, something we can't really ask them about. But that's definitely something that's, I think, on some people's minds, and we'll want to figure out as soon as we can, get their thoughts on it.
I saw you write that in December, and I had to read it 2 or 3 times. I was like, I had never thought about that. I thought it was such an interesting concept, and like you said, I wish that we could ask Chaim Bloom, call him up right now and ask him the question, but that just isn't a possibility. But one thing that happened early on in the lockout was, it was reported that the Red Sox had interest or checked in on Trevor Story, and that sort of put Red Sox Nation into a flurry of, oh my God, is Xander Bogaerts going to move over to second base, or is the Red Sox going to sign Trevor Story and put him at second base? And how much of a likelihood do you see of the Red Sox actually going out and spending money to sign Trevor Story?
Yeah, I don't think so. It's hard to, again, peg down some of these big moves. Even with, a guy like Carlos Correa, I know everybody's kind of pining for him too. I just, the thing that I keep going back to is you have to convince Xander Bogaerts to move off of shortstop. And that's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. And also, you're just assuming he's going to be a good second baseman. I don't know. There's kind of a lot of variables that I think people just think that's the easy solution. Is just, move Bogaerts over to second. He's never played second, and he's always he's just kind of the heart and soul of your team that Cora kind of turns to for a lot of different things. And having that kind of conversation in a year where it's possibly his last year because he could be opting out at the end of the year. Alex Cora doesn't generally operate that way, where it would almost be kind of like a slap across the face to Bogaerts. I don't know. There's a lot of just too many variables there that I know where people are coming from and wanting to sign some of these exciting free agents, whether it is Story or Correa or any of the other guys that kind of were on the market earlier this winter. But it's not like a 1-for-1 kind of swap. And I think you have to kind of think at the big picture. And do you want a struggling Bogaerts at second base, not being able to even produce at the plate because he's trying to figure out second base and the angles and everything? I don't know. There's so many different things that I think you have to think about before going into that. And I think that's probably where the Red Sox are what the Red Sox are thinking too. But, like I said earlier, Bloom's done things that have surprised us a lot in the past. So, I guess never say never, but I think it would take a lot to ask Bogaerts to move off that position and for him to, get up to speed in a shortened spring training, learn all of the just positional, situations in a short spring training, like right away. I think it would be a little bit more of a disaster than people are thinking it would be.
And I know that Red Sox fans are impatient. They're always in win now mode. And I understand wanting to move Xander Bogaerts over to second. And, I know the appeal of Story and Correa and everything like that. But you brought up these really good points of the mental aspect in a position he hasn't played. And this is a year that you definitely want to cater to Bogaerts because, like you mentioned, he can opt out. And if that happens because the Red Sox move him to second, I feel like all hell will break loose with Red Sox fans.
Yeah, exactly. People would be saying this now, but then, if the Red Sox, if he decided to leave, then it would be on the Red Sox too. So I feel like, it's one of those kind of like catch-22s of, you want everything to be perfect and it's just, it's not how it works. So yeah, I think they try to strengthen the defense around Bogaerts. Maybe that's why they go after a strong, defensive second baseman. But yeah, obviously, it's going to be something that we're going to be talking about heading into spring training. And that first session that we have with Bogaerts in spring training is probably going to be the first question that's asked of him. So I'm sure he hasn't been able to avoid the speculation or the rumors. And he knows all those, he knows Correa, he knows, Story, he knows all those guys. So I'm sure people are talking and wondering, and these guys aren't, oblivious to what's happening. So yeah, it's one of those things that unfortunately we'll have to wait and see, but it's definitely going to be a big storyline heading into spring training.
Very true. And, especially with John Lester retiring yesterday, all Red Sox fans are hoping and praying is that they don't, frustrate Xander Bogaerts. So a John Lester 2.0 situation happens where, they trade him or, they upset him and he signs elsewhere. But really appreciate you taking the time today, Jen, and giving all your insight. And for anybody that wants to check out your stories throughout the offseason, obviously during the season as well, and follow you, where can they find you?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think you mentioned, the athletic.com and on Twitter at JC McCaffrey.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, guys.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Locked On Red Sox, and as well as enjoying our conversation with the Athletic's Jen McCaffrey. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in today and making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at Lauren, 3 laws, Lauren with 4 R's. Check out all of my work right on NESN.com. Also, be sure to follow Jake on Twitter at Jake Iggy, as well as the Locked On Red Sox Twitter account at LO_Red Sox. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to Locked On Red Sox so you never miss an episode, whether it's right here on YouTube, on Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcasts. Also, be sure to check out all of the other amazing shows right here on the Locked On Network. Locked On A's, Locked On Yankees, Locked On Giants, Locked On Astros. Everyone does an incredible job, especially during this lockout when there's not a lot of baseball going on. Everyone's killing it over on Locked On Network, so be sure to check it out. And now that you've made Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day, head on over now to Locked On Bets to make it your second listen. Locked On Bets is your one-stop shop for all of your betting needs. It's hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. And be sure to check Locked On Red Sox this week. We have some amazing episodes planned for you, and we cannot wait to share them with you. Have a great day. We will see you soon.